And we're back. Welcome to Philosophy 15. These are 15-minute unscripted conversations between two philosophers, both at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee, one of whom is named Robert Talisse.
And one of them is named Scott Aiken.
All right. Today, for this session, Scott and I are going to talk about an error in reasoning or prescriptive theorizing that we've called the curative fallacy.
So a common error, or a common way that we often think about things, is that if you have a problem, one of the ways to fix the problem is that you fix what caused the problem. So you say, okay, you've got high blood pressure because you're eating too much salt. Reduce your salt intake. Yeah. You've got a leak in your. You've got water coming in because you've got a hole in your roof. You can stop the water from coming in by fixing the hole in your roof. So what you do is you find the cause, you fix the cause of the error, and fix the cause of the problem, and that cures the problem that you face. And that's a pretty good default. You might call that a sort of a decent heuristic, which is that you find the cause, you eliminate the cause, you fixed the problem.
And a lot of prescriptive programs that call themselves radical, right, trade on this etymological fact about the word radical,
the root,
and then sort of turn this into what is often presented as some deep normative insight. Got to go to the root of the problem,
right, which is the original cause.
Yeah.
Right. So you're doing the etiology, and the etiology, the causology, the history of the problem illuminates what the solution to the problem is,
right,
which is that you identify the cause, you eliminate the cause.
You eliminate the cause, and then by eliminating the cause, you remediate or correct or fix the effect.
So it's a kind of genetic reasoning.
Yeah.
Right.
And in lots of contexts, it's perfectly fine.
Hole in your roof,
yeah,
high blood pressure.
Yeah.
So, but the problem is, by analogy, there are plenty of cases that are not. Very simple example to just start. Your horse has escaped from the pen because you left the door open. You're not going to solve the problem of the horses not being in the pen by just closing the door.
In fact, you complicate the problem that you're trying to solve by closing the door, because in order to get the horse back in the stable, you need to open the door. The door needs to be open.
So in that case, that cure actually doesn't just not solve the problem; it prevents the problem from being solved. It worsens it.
Yeah, that's right. So there are all kinds of cases in which it looks as if it's a mistake from the point of view of developing a remediation or a prescription to theorize what sorts of things, had we done them, would have prevented the problem from arising, and then inferring from that identification of the things that, had we been doing them all along, would have prevented the problem. Inferring that those are the things we should start doing now.
Right. So, simple example, imagine that you have heart disease. Had you been involved in a regimen of regular heavy exercise, you would have been able to prevent the heart disease. But now that you've got the heart disease, heavy exercise is a problem.
That's right.
Not only will not fix the problem, will actually exacerbate the problem.
That's right. Or consider a different kind of case. Now, here's a different variation. Maybe, let's just stipulate, had you never been a smoker, you would not now have lung cancer. It might still be advisable for you to quit smoking. In fact, it probably is advisable for you to quit smoking. All else being equal, you should quit smoking, right? But it's not a cure. It's not a treatment of the cancer. It's not a treatment of this cancer. Right. There are some cancers, to understand that eliminating the cause does sort of help slow down the progress of the cancer. But it's certainly not a treatment of your cancer to quit smoking. So it looks as if from these kinds of cases, from the fixing the hole in the roof, to the horse in the stable, to the heart disease case, to the lung cancer case, looks as if we've got a couple of different ways in which the preventative measures and the curative steps can be related. But note that there's only some cases in which the preventative is the curative, that the thing to do, the thing to prescribe to remediate the problem is to just start doing the thing that had you been doing it all along, you never would have caused the problem. The problem wouldn't have emerged. But that we've got a whole list of different ways in which these two ideas can be related, such that it's just not always the case that the curative is also, right, the preventative is also the curative, or the thing that you could have been doing all along, which would have prevented the problem from arising, is the thing you need to do now that the problem has arisen. Given that there's all these different ways in which curatives and preventatives can be connected, it looks as if it's an error to simply infer, when doing normative prescriptive theorizing, simply infer from a solid story of the preventative,
had we only,
some really quick inference to a curative prescription.
So we oughta.
That is just the, this is the thing we need to do. Now, when it's laid out in this way, I think this is very, very, this looks clear enough that it's a surprise
that it happens so often. Yeah, but this is the thing about fallacy theory. It's like once you state what the error is, you're like, how do we commit it? And you're like, well,
that's right. That's what
attention to that.
That's what fallacies are. Fallacies are deeply attractive, magnetic errors in reasoning.
Yeah.
And we might want to say, just to add a little bit of specificity, the fallacy here is to present the preventative as the curative without showing the intermediary stuff that would be necessary in order to demonstrate that the problem that you're trying to remediate is like the hole in the roof or the high blood pressure, and not like heart disease or the cancer.
And it's a good heuristic. I mean, the other part of it is that it's a good heuristic, which is it's a good place to start. We're like, look, if you don't know what the solution is, then go back and see what the what would have been preventative. Like, that's a good place to start, maybe.
And it's probably informative too. It probably helps you to understand what the problem is, to identify what would have prevented it.
So we've explained now why it's so pervasive and why it's so attractive.
Right.
And we can also see now how it can be an error. Let's add one extra element to this and one extra complication, because part of the reason why we get the error, why it doesn't follow in some cases, is because the causal networks are more complicated than just merely what led to the bad thing.
That's right.
And so now let's start adding in how we fix our relationships with each other, or how we fix our political system, because it's really the curative fallacy in politics. That's the problem.
This is exactly right. So a place to go look for the curative fallacy is in sort of quasi-prescriptive theorizing about democratic politics, where it's so pervasive, it's so common to find, from academic work to op-eds, the following thought: our politics is toxic for reasons A, B, and C. Had we all along been engaging in practices P, Q, and R, toxicities A, B, and C would never have arisen. Therefore, citizens need to start engaging in practices P, Q, and R. It's just the fallacy, right? It might be true that our politics would be far less toxic had we all along been engaging in practices of attentive listening and sympathetic, perspective taking and civil interaction. If we had been doing that all along, our politics would not be so toxic. That looks to me like it's got to be true.
Correct.
Okay. It just doesn't follow that introducing those practices now counts as a method or should be plausibly regarded as an intervention that de-escalates or dissolves the toxicity.
Because there's plenty of evidence that it doesn't. Take, for example, the simple fact that like the toxicity between two people can be explained by the fact that they were impolite to each other at some certain points. Well, once it's toxic, being polite is taken more often taken as something accusatory to the other person.
And condescending and strategic.
And patronizing. Yeah, you're doing it not for me anymore. You're doing it for some onlooking person. That once the suspicion is high, the return to whatever sort of norms of maintaining the copacetic relationship with each other now take on a very different charge. So now just extrapolate this to, hey, had we been paying attention to each other and had the coastal elites actually taken into account the voters in the flyover country, we wouldn't have this problem. But now that we do have this problem, the attention of the coastal elites in flyover country now takes on the vantage point, and now takes on a hue of, well, now I guess we're just married to these folks, so let's get Hayseed Johnny up there talking, and Hayseed Johnny hates that.
That's right.
Hayseed Johnny's not a proper name, but that's the problem, is that it's got now that valence of now they're doing anthropology instead of actually being interested.
That's right. Or think about the turn the other cheek. Like, there's another good example. It's just like, well, look, a lot depends on what caused you to get slapped in the first place.
Correct.
But the turn the other cheek ethic, very, the I love you despite how much of a shit you are, right? It's like, well, yeah, we should be loving each other.
We should be loving each other.
But now that you've hit me, that I said, well, now I'm going to show you how much I love you by offering you the other cheek to slap.
Yeah.
It's like, that could just be looked at, that
don't you high road me.
That could be an escalation in itself. Now, it turns out that in the political context, we've got a lot of, the data are always multivalent because the phenomena are so complicated. We've got a lot of data that suggests that once people are in toxic partisan, cross-partisan relations, once they have adopted a stance of animosity towards perceived members of an out-group or an out-party, exposure to civil messaging from the perceived outsiders amplifies the negative affect. It instigates the animosity. It amplifies the negative affect. And so it looks as if here's a case in which, for many populations that are sort of beset by partisan animosity, sort of facilitated civility interactions might be counterproductive.
Think of how alienating it is whenever the difference between somebody being genuinely curious and someone saying they're just curious. The latter is considerably more alienating. It's like once you're actually alienated from each other, someone saying they're just curious about you, they're not really curious about you. What they're doing is they're gathering more evidence for their contempt. That's
exactly right. And that is, in this case, as you've described it, properly an instigation.
Yeah.
For more negative, for more hostility.
Yeah. I'm just curious. And I was like, well, now I'm putting up my dukes when you're just curious.
So, there's a lot of work in democratic theory and democratic practice that is aimed at providing settings and forums and contexts where citizens who are divided by their toxic partisanship, they're providing lots of cases where we're providing context where such citizens can interact civilly. Good. It's just not clear, even when they succeed, that it's treatment for political toxicity.
And again, it's partly because of the fact that these causal nexes that yield the problems are more complicated than just the story as to how we got here.
That's exactly right. All right, folks. Philosophy 15, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.